The day I carried a warm pie across the street to my widowed neighbor, I had no idea I was about to change both of our lives forever. I thought I was simply offering kindness to an elderly man who looked too lonely behind his quiet windows. But one sentence he said while holding that pie made me freeze, because hidden behind his joke was a lifetime of pain, memories, and a heart that had almost forgotten what it felt like to be cared for. Before we continue, if you believe kindness can heal broken hearts and second chances can appear in the most unexpected places, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Echoes of Hope. Your support helps us share more stories that remind us there is still goodness in the world. My name is Maribel, and for years I lived in a small neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, but somehow loneliness still found its way into many homes. My own house was one of them. After losing my husband, I learned that silence could be louder than any argument. The mornings felt endless, the evenings felt heavier, and the empty chair at my dining table became a painful reminder of everything I had lost. I tried to stay busy. I worked part-time from home, tended to my small garden, and baked whenever sadness became too strong. Baking had always been my way of turning difficult moments into something warm. The smell of cinnamon, butter, and fresh fruit filling the kitchen made my house feel alive again, even when my heart felt tired. Across the street lived a man named Alistair. He was a widower who had lived alone for many years. Most neighbors knew him as the quiet gentleman who walked slowly every afternoon with a wooden cane and always wore a neatly pressed shirt. He rarely spoke more than a few words, and people assumed he preferred being alone. But I noticed things others did not. I noticed how his porch light stayed on long after midnight. I noticed how he sometimes stood near his window watching families walk by. I noticed how his garden, once beautiful, had slowly become overgrown because there was no one left to care for it. One rainy morning, I saw Alistair struggle to bring groceries from his car to his front door. He dropped a bag, and oranges rolled across the driveway. I rushed outside to help him. He looked embarrassed and apologized repeatedly, saying he was perfectly capable of managing. I smiled and told him everyone needs help sometimes. That simple moment became the beginning of a quiet friendship. Over the next few weeks, we started talking more. Not for hours, not with dramatic conversations, but through small moments. I would wave from my porch. He would ask about my garden. Sometimes he would tell me stories about the past, about the old neighborhood before the streets filled with new houses and unfamiliar faces. I learned that Alistair had been married to a woman named Celestine for almost 50 years. He spoke about her with the kind of love that did not fade with time. He told me she loved music, flowers, and making desserts for every family gathering. The first time he mentioned her, his voice became softer. I realized he was not just missing a person. He was missing an entire life. One afternoon, while preparing dinner, I noticed I had baked too much pie filling. I looked across the street and saw Alistair sitting alone on his porch, staring at an old photograph in his hands. Without thinking too much, I prepared a fresh apple pie and wrapped it carefully. The sun was setting when I walked over. He opened the door slowly, surprised to see me standing there with a pie. I told him I made too much and thought he might enjoy it. The truth was, I knew exactly why I brought it. I knew what it felt like to sit alone at a table with no one asking how your day went. Alistair looked at the pie, then looked at me. For a moment, his expression changed. It was as if someone had given him something much bigger than dessert. He invited me inside. His home was clean but strangely empty. Everything was arranged perfectly, but it felt like the house was waiting for someone who would never return. There were photographs of him and Celestine everywhere. Young, smiling, dancing, traveling, and growing old together. We sat in his living room while the smell of warm apples filled the air. He took one bite and closed his eyes. He said it reminded him of the pies Celestine used to make. Then he laughed quietly and said that if he were 20 years younger, he would marry me for a pie like that. I laughed too because I knew he was joking, but something about his words stayed with me. It was not the idea of marriage that touched me. It was the loneliness behind the joke. It was the way he tried to hide his emotions behind humor because maybe he had forgotten how to simply say, "Thank you for seeing me." After that day, our friendship grew. We began having lunch together sometimes. I brought baked goods, and he shared stories from his younger years. He told me about his first job, his adventures with Celestine, and the dreams they had once planned. I also shared my own struggles. I told him about the nights after losing my husband when I wondered how I would ever feel normal again. For the first time in a long time, I did not feel like I was carrying my grief alone. But life has a way of testing even the strongest connections. A few months later, Alistair stopped answering his door. At first, I assumed he was resting. But when his porch light remained off for 2 nights, worry started creeping in. I knocked several times before hearing his weak voice telling me he was inside. I found him sitting in his chair, unable to get up because he had fallen earlier that day. My heart broke seeing him like that. The man who always tried to appear strong suddenly looked fragile. He apologized for being a burden, but I refused to let him push me away. I called for help and stayed until everything was handled. The doctors said he was lucky someone noticed quickly. They told him he needed more support and could not continue living completely alone. That conversation changed something in him. For years, Alistair believed accepting help meant losing his independence. But slowly, he began to understand that allowing people to care for him did not make him weak. It made him human. I started helping him organize his home. We cleaned old boxes, repaired his garden, and brought life back into rooms that had been silent for too long. One afternoon, while sorting through old belongings, we found a small notebook that belonged to Celestine. Inside were handwritten recipes, memories, and little notes about their life together. Alistair held the notebook tightly and cried. He told me he had avoided opening it because he was afraid the memories would hurt too much. I told him something I had learned myself: memories can hurt because they mattered. But pain does not mean we should lock them away forever. After that, Alistair started changing. He began sitting outside more often. He greeted neighbors. He even started helping children nearby learn how to grow flowers in his garden. The same man people thought wanted to be alone became someone everyone looked forward to seeing. Months passed, and one sunny afternoon, he visited my house carrying something behind his back. He gave me a small wooden box. Inside was a recipe card holder he had built himself. It was simple, but beautifully made. He told me he remembered my first pie and how one small act of kindness reminded him that life could still surprise him. He said he never expected to find friendship again after losing Celestine. And then he smiled and reminded me of his old joke about marrying me for a pie. But this time, his voice became emotional. He said he did not mean the joke the way people might think. He meant that he was grateful someone walked into his lonely days and reminded him he was still worth caring about. I looked at that man, who had once sat alone behind closed doors, and I realized something important. Sometimes people are not asking for grand gestures. Sometimes they are simply waiting for someone to notice. A pie was just a pie. But the kindness behind it became a bridge between 2 wounded hearts. Alistair and I never became what people might have expected from that joke. We became something even more meaningful. We became family in the way that matters most, not because of blood, but because we chose to show up for each other. Years later, whenever I baked that same apple pie, he would sit on my porch, smile, and tell me that one dessert changed his life. And I would always tell him the truth. It was not the pie that changed everything. It was the reminder that even after loss, even after loneliness, there can still be warmth waiting at the door. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to Echoes of Hope so we can continue bringing you stories filled with love, healing, and hope. Before the ending, I have a special request: comment, Kindness always finds a way, if you believe one small good deed can change someone's entire world. Because sometimes the smallest acts create the biggest miracles, and sometimes the person we help is also the person who helps us heal.